the first question I was asked by email is from Sarat. What he wrote is, I have a question regarding initiation. Does Atma-vichara require initiation by a guru? Can't we do it on our own? And if we do so, can we get the result of it over a period of time? How to do Atma-vichara in a systematic way? Regarding initiation, the English word initiation means to start. And Bhagavan sometimes used to say regarding this word, the fact that we have been drawn to this path means we've already started. So no separate initiation is necessary. If by initiation you mean a formal ritual, like a formal diksha, in other spiritual paths, they may say it is necessary to undergo a formal ritual of initiation, but in this path, there's no such thing. Sometimes it is said that there are 3 types of diksha. Diksha by touch, diksha by sight, and diksha by thought. So that is, the guru can initiate a disciple either by touching him or her, or by looking at him or her, or by thinking of him or her. Bhagavan said about these 3 types of diksha, that is the most powerful of these 3 is the diksha by thought. Less powerful is diksha by sight, less powerful is diksha by touch. That is, as you go subtler, you get more power. Bhagavan said the most powerful of all diksha is Mona diksha, initiation by silence. That initiation by silence is always going on in our heart. That is, Bhagavan is always exists silently in our heart, shining as I am. So he is always giving us that Mona diksha. So no other diksha is necessary. As I say, the very fact that we've been attracted to this path means we are fit to follow this path. And so, yes, regarding your question, can we do it on our own? We can do it only on our own. This is not a path we can follow with anyone else. We each have to turn our attention within to see what we actually are. So if we follow the path that Bhagavan has taught us, yes, we will certainly get the result of it. It does take time because to know ourselves takes no time at all. If we turn and we attend wholly to ourselves, we will know ourselves here and now. The problem is that we all have strong Vishaya vasanas, that is, desires and attachments for things other than ourselves. So long as we have desires and attachments, we are unwilling to turn our mind wholly within, because when we turn our mind within, we have to let go of everything else. Until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely, we will not be willing to turn our attention the full 180 degrees within. So it does take time to slowly wean our mind off its desires and attachments. Once we have, once our desires and attachments have been weakened to a sufficient extent, then we will be willing to turn the full 180 degrees and thereby let go of everything else. That is the state of complete surrender. So the final dawn of self-knowledge happens instantaneously. That is, the ego. The ego is either alive or dead. Once it's dead, it's dead. That's finished. So it happens in an instant. There's no halfway between a living ego and a dead ego. But in order for us as this ego to surrender ourselves, we need to have considerably weakened our Vishaya vasanas, our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. Regarding how to do Atma-vichara in a systematic way, as Bhagavan says in the 16th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. He says very clearly, manate, sadakalamum manate ātma-vichara Atma-vichara. That means the name Atma-vichara refers only to the practice of always keeping the mind in or on oneself, Atman. So when we keeping the mind on ourselves means keeping our attention fixed on ourselves. So all that the practice of self-investigation is nothing but just being self-attentive. Why is this the case? Because our aim is to know what we actually are. In order to know something, we need to attend to it. So to know anything other than ourselves, we may need, to know anything in the external world, we need one or more of our five senses. We also need the mind to attend through the five senses. So instruments are needed to know things other than ourselves. To know ourselves, no instruments are necessary. We don't need microscopes or telescopes, or we don't even need the five senses. We just need our power of attention. We need to turn our attention is now facing outwards towards things other than ourselves. We need to turn this attention back to face ourselves alone. That is all there is to the practice of self-investigation. So as I say, if we want an analogy we can give for this, supposing you want to see the midday sun, what do you have to do? You simply have to look at it. Well, that means you have to face up in the sky and look at the sun. When you look at the sun, you'll be blinded. Likewise, when we look at ourselves, ego will be annihilated. Because we are not yet willing to let go of this ego, we don't turn 180 degrees towards ourselves. We're only turning partially towards ourselves. But the more we persevere in this practice, the more our Vishaya vasanas will be weakened, and the more we'll be willing to turn within to face ourselves alone. If you ask how to look at the sun systematically, it's looking at something. It's not something you can do systematically. It's not a matter of systematically. What is required is perseverance. Because we are not yet willing to turn the full 180 degrees, we need to keep on trying to turn our attention towards ourselves as much as we can. The more we turn it towards ourselves, the more our Vishaya vasanas will be weakened. So we need, what Bhagavan emphasizes most important is patient perseverance. We need to persevere. It doesn't matter how many times our attention is diverted away from ourselves towards other things. We have to bring it back to face ourselves. So it's by repeatedly trying to be self-attentive and holding on to the self-attentiveness as much as possible when we are self-attentive. This is the way forward. So it's by perseverance, holding on to self-attentiveness as much as we can. And when our attention slips away towards other things, patiently bringing it back towards ourselves. So that is all there is to the practice of Atma-vichara. It's an extremely simple practice, because what can be simpler than attending to other things, to ourselves? To attend to anything else requires we are sending our mind, so to speak, away from ourselves towards other things. But to attend to ourselves or to know ourselves, all we need to do is to rest in our source, because the source of attention is ourself. When we are attending to ourselves, we are retaining our attention in its source. So actually, Atma-vichara is not a doing, it's a state of just being. That will become more and more clear to us as we persevere in the practice. The deeper we go in this practice, the more we will understand this is not a doing, this is just a being. But in order to be as we actually are, we need to be self-attentive, because what we actually are is just pure awareness. So it's to the extent that we attend only to ourselves, to that extent are we abiding as ourselves. Are we being as we actually are? So, Sarat, I hope that adequately answers your question, if you're here. Okay. Does anyone have any question?
There is one on chat, Michael.
I see Francis has raised his...
Yeah, and also chat. I think Jyoti, I saw something.
Okay. Okay, so Francis, would you like to ask?
Yes, Michael, thank you. Just wanted to ask, in Sri Sadhu's second path of Sri Ramana, he talks about the four standards using the example of the man. And what I'm finding is that the names and forms are kind of at the lower level, and to Sadhguru, to really, what you just said, the self, which is almost very counterintuitive, is to just keep going inward, that the real Sadhguru is ourself.
Yes.
And therefore you don't need any more. It doesn't matter who the guru is, who the form is.
Yes, well,
that's it.
Because our minds are outward going, it is necessary for the guru to appear in human form to tell us to turn within. So obviously it's natural for us to have love for and devotion to the name and form of a guru, because I mean, who can avoid having love for Bhagavan? Because he's appeared and he's given us these beautiful, simple teachings, we naturally have love for him. But what he emphasizes is, he is not the form that he seems to be. He is that which is always shining in our heart as I. He says that once when, I don't know if you saw a recent video that I posted about a verse that Bhagavan wrote on Aruṇācalaramaṇaṉ. That is, someone asked him, because people are at different levels of maturity, so they view the guru in different ways. And some people like to consider the guru to be a form of a particular god, particularly if for example, if you're devoted to Subramanya, you like to think guru is Subram. You like to think, oh, Bhagavan is Subramanya in human form. Or if you're devoted to Shiva, he's Shiva in human form. Or if you're devoted to Krishna, he's Krishna in human form. So people have such bhavanas. But there was disagreement among Bhagavan's devotees, whether Bhagavan is Subramanya or Shiva or some other god. So a devotee wrote a verse in Malayalam asking Bhagavan whether he's this god or that god. Bhagavan replied in a Malayalam verse in the same meter, which he then immediately translated into Tamil, in which he said, Aruṇācalaramaṇaṇ is the Paramatma, the supreme self, that is the ultimate self, our own real nature, that is shining, that is blissfully existing as awareness in the cave of the heart lotus of all different jivas, beginning with Hari. That means beginning with Vishnu. So what is shining in the heart of every one of us as pure awareness, that is as the awareness I am, that is Aruṇācalaramaṇaṇ. That he says in the first two lines, and in the second two lines of that verse, he says, let's say, no, just get the verse. In the second two lines of that verse, he says, very, very beautifully, he says, heart melting with love, reaching or merging in the cave where the sublime supreme dwells, the eye that is awareness opening, you will know that which, you will know nijam. Nijam means that which is innate, or that which is real, that which is one's own nature. Adu veliyam, because it will reveal itself. So the key to knowing what the Guru really is, what Aruṇācala really is for our heart to melt with love and thereby turn within and merge into the cave where he dwells as awareness. And when we do so, our eye of awareness will be opened. Eye of awareness here means the awareness of ourself as we actually are will reveal itself. So though Guru appears outwardly in name and form, the purpose of the outward name and form of a Guru is to turn us within. So no real Guru will come to me, come to us and say, no real Guru will say, come to me, I will give you liberation. The real Guru will say, you are already limited. Look at yourself. You will see what you actually are. So the Guru will not ask us to come to him. He'll ask us to go back to ourselves. Because what the Guru really is nothing but our own self. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes. So the real Sadguru is ourself.
Yes, yes. It is our self that has appeared outwardly in the name and form of the Guru, or the name and form of Bhagavan. It's nothing but our own Atma-sarupa. Bhagavan often uses the term Atma-sarupa, which is a very beautiful term. Atma means oneself. Swarupa means, literally it means our own form, but it's a term that is used in the sense of the real nature. So the real nature, Bhagavan is nothing but the real nature of ourself. That is, he is what we actually are. So in order to know him as he is, we need to know ourselves. Bhagavan also says it very clearly in verses 24 and 25 of Upadēśa Undiyār. In verse 24, he says, by existing nature, God and soul are just one substance. Only adjunct awareness is different. That is, in our real nature, we and God are just one substance. That one substance he refers to here is the pure awareness, the awareness of our own existence. I am. That is the nature of ourself. That is the nature of God. That is what we actually are. What makes us seem to be different from God is that now we identify ourselves with certain adjuncts. Instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am this or I am that. I am this body. When we identify ourselves with this body, we thereby limit ourselves, and thereby we seem to be different from God. So how to know God? Bhagavan says in the next verse, Tanne upadi vittu ovadu, tan isan tanne unavadam. That is, knowing oneself without adjuncts or leaving aside adjuncts is itself knowing God, because God shines as oneself. God and Guru are one and the same, as Bhagavan often said. So what the purpose of Guru, the purpose of the outward name and form of Guru is to turn us back within to know the true nature of Guru, or the true nature of God, which is our own true nature. Ultimately, all is one. There is no second. Ekkameva advityam, one only without a second. That is the ultimate truth. That is what we have to experience, which we can do only by turning within.
Thank you, Michael.
So I'll, Jyoti and Ash, before I answer your questions, I'll just answer one more question that I was asked by email.
Sure.
The next question I was asked was by Sanjay. He wrote, I have recently come to know about verse 9 of Moha Mudgara. Moha Mudgara is a song of composed by Adi Shankara. Moha Mudgara means the hammer on delusion, or the hammer on delusion. And it's a song that is popularly known as Bhaja Govindam, because the refrain of the song is Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam. And in verse 9, he says, sat-saṅgatve nissaṅgatvam, nissaṅgatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nischalatatvam, nischalatatvam, nischalatatve jivan mukti. What that literally means is, in the state of satsanga, the state of nissaṅga implies the state of nissaṅga arises. Satsanga means, simple meaning is association with sat, or attachment to sat. So by attachment to sat, to what is real, the state of nissaṅga, the state of non-attachment, arises. So in order to be free from attachment to anything other than ourselves, we need to be attached to what is real. Is the implication of that first sentence, sat-saṅgatve nissaṅgatvam. Nissaṅgatve nirmohatvam. In the state of nissaṅga, the state of nirmoha arises. Moha means delusion. So nirmoha means freedom from delusion. So by satsanga, nissaṅga arises. By nissaṅga, nirmoha arises. That is, the freedom from delusion arises. Nirmohatve nischalatatvam. In the state of nirmoha, the state free of delusion, nischalatatva, that is the true state of nischala means motionlessness. That means, implies motionless being arises. So when our delusion is removed, we attain the state of nischala. And in nischala tattva, jiva mukti. That jiva mukti results from nischala tattva. This is what Sanjay asked me is, I think this is a beautiful verse and full of deep meaning. It would be wonderful if you could expand on this verse in our next Zoom meeting of Ramana Maharshi Foundation. This verse is very revealing and quite relevant to our practice of self-investigation. I would love if you could explain more fully the range of meaning of the terms in this verse. Sat-saṅga, nissaṅga, nirmoha, nischalatatva, jiva mukti. As with many verses, this is a verse that can be interpreted at different levels. The term sat-saṅga, nowadays this is a very popular term, and it's used very freely and very widely, but it has a much deeper meaning than just a group of good people getting together and talking about spiritual things. That's maybe satsanga in a very ordinary sense, but it has a much deeper meaning. As Bhagavan often said, sat means what is real, or what actually exists. Satsanga means sangha with sat. So the real satsanga, what is sat? Sat is what we actually are. So the real satsanga is atma-saṅga. Sangha has a range of meanings. Sangha means come together. The basic meaning of sangha is come together. So it, depending on the context, it can mean clinging to, attachment to, devotion to, affection for, contact with, or association with. So if you're associated with a jnani, because a jnani is an embodiment of sat, it generally being in the company of a jnani is considered a satsanga. But Bhagavan said, more than always the subtler is more powerful. So the being merely in the physical presence of the Sadguru or the jnani is definitely a form of satsanga, and it will definitely have its own benefit. But that is a relatively, that is not such a deep form of satsanga. More than just being in the physical presence of the Guru, it's important that our mind is surrendered to him. So the surrender of the mind to the Guru, that is a much deeper form of satsanga. And that is if people think, if those who who were there with Bhagavan in his lifetime. They are fortunate, they could have sat-saṅga with him. Now his body had passed away, he's no longer available, we can't have sat-saṅga with him. That is not correct, because Sangha means, in this context, it means association with or devotion to. We can be, if we have devotion to Bhagavan, that itself is sat-saṅga. And if we want to have association with Bhagavan, more than having association just with his physical form, having association with his teachings is more efficacious. Because why did Bhagavan appear in human form? He appeared in human form to give us teachings, to tell us to turn back within. So by studying Bhagavan's teachings, thinking deeply about them and putting them into practice, that is a very, very great satsanga. So satsanga, as I say, we can interpret it on different levels, but the deepest form of satsanga, as Bhagavan said, is ātma-saṅga. Ātma-saṅga means attachment to ourself. That implies being self-attentive. That is the most powerful satsanga. So the more we are self-attentive, or the more we have any other form of satsanga, the more we will achieve non-attachment, nisaṅga. That is, we will be detached from other things. That is, the more we are attached to knowing ourselves, the less we will be attached to anything else. So in order to wean our mind away from its other attachments, we need to be attached to ourselves, to sat, to what is real. And what is real is only ourself, according to Bhagavan. So the more we turn our attention within, the more we free ourselves from attachment to other things. And when our mind is free from attachment to other things, it is thereby freed from delusion. Because delusion, that is, the more we're attached to other things, the more dense is our delusion or our self-ignorance. The more we detach ourselves from other things, the more we become detached from other things, the less dense will be our self-ignorance. So, and the less dense our self-ignorance, the closer we come to the state of just being. That's the nischala tattva. That is, as our mind is freed from its attachment to other things, it comes to a state of quiescence. And in that state of, it's freed from a delusion, and thereby it's willing to subside in the state of nischala tattva. That is the state of nischala. Chala means movement. Nischala means freedom from movement, absence of movement. So nischala tattva means the true state of motionless being. That is, the more we turn our attention within, the closer we come to the state of just being as we actually are, is the implication. And only in the state where nischala tattva, the state where we, of ātma-vichara, of just being as we actually are, it's in that state that the true knowledge will shine forth. That true knowledge is what is referred to here as jiva mukti. Jiva mukti literally means liberation while alive. Of course, we can't, that means while the body is still alive, the self-knowledge dawns. Of course, it's only in the view of the onlooker that the jnani is a jiva mukta, because the body of the jnani exists only in the view of those who are still in the state of ignorance. For the jnani, he is, when the ego is annihilated, we are thereby separated forever from body, mind, and everything. So the state of jiva mukti, that is, the term jiva mukti, is a term that is applicable to the others' view of a jnani. That is, so take Bhagavan, for example. He, according to our view of his bodily life, he attained jnana at the age of 16, but he lived for another 54 years after that. So those 54 years, when his body continued living after the ego had been annihilated, that is called the state of jiva mukti. But according to Bhagavan, that's only in our view, because in his view, when ego is destroyed, he's aware of himself just as pure awareness, as that infinite Satchidananda. As he says in verse, I think 28 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Anadi, Ananta, Akhanda, Satchidananda. That is the he says in verse 28 of Upadēśa Undiyār, if one knows what the nature of oneself is, then beginningless, endless, unbroken Satchidananda. That means what we experience after when we know ourselves is just Satchidananda. We're not aware of anything other than ourselves. And that state is beginningless, endless, and Ananta means endless. It also means limitless, infinite, Akhanda, unbroken, Satchidananda. So that is Bhagavan's experience of himself. But from our point of view, he seems to be still living in a body, so we say he's a Jiva Mukta. So yes, this verse, it's a very beautiful verse, very simple verse, and because it's such an appealing verse and such a popular verse, Bhagavan translated it into Tamil, and in Tamil, Bhagavan's Tamil version of this verse is the first verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Abandam, and in that verse, the Tamil term he used for Sangha is inakam, which, like Sangha, it means friendship, intimacy, love, attachment, affection, connection, union. It has many meanings, but all closely related to Sangha. And at the end of the verse, he says, I'll just get the verse. He adds one sentence which is not there in the Sanskrit original. Ava inakam pain. Ava means there. That's implying the jnani that cherish association with, cherish their inakam. That means cherish devotion to them, cherish association with them, cherish attachment to them. So Bhagavan, in translating that verse, he gave his full, he expressed his full approval for what Shankara expressed in this verse. And then in the next, Sanjay went on to say, I think verse 9 of Bhaja Govindam can also be read along with verse 9 of Upadēśa Undiyār. What Bhagavan says in Upadēśa Undiyār is by the strength of, by Bhava Balam. Bhava Balam means by the strength of meditation. In this context, he's referring to what he was talking about in the previous verse, which is Ananya Bhava. Ananya Bhava means meditation on what is not other. In other words, meditation on ourself or self-attentiveness. So Bhava Balatinal means by implies by the strength of self-attentiveness or by the intensity of self-attentiveness, being in Sat Bhava. Sat Bhava is the state of being which transcends Bhavana. Bhavana Kita means which transcends Bhavana. Bhavana means meditation in the sense of thinking, imagination, or in the sense of meditation as a mental activity. So by the strength of meditation, not the meditation as a not bhavana, but here he's referring to the ananya bhava, meditation, which is just meditation on ourselves. By that we remain in the state of sat bhava, which transcends all bhavana, and that alone is parabhakti tattva. So yes, there is some similarity here. By the strength of the Bhava Balam, because from the context, because this is, verse 9 is a continuation of the previous verse. Verse 9 of Upadēśa Undiyār is a continuation of the previous verse, where he says, Ananya Bhava is the best of all. The implication of Bhava Balam is the strength of Ananya Bhava. That means the strength of self-attentiveness. So that is parallel to the meaning of sat-saṅga. If we take sat-saṅga in the sense of ātma-saṅga, association with ourself or attachment to ourself. So, but by the strength of that self-attentiveness, we remain in sat bhava. Sat-bhava is we can say is parallel, is the equivalent of a nischala tattva, the state of motionless being. And Bhagavan says that is the parabhakti tattva, that is the supreme devotion. So there is a certain degree of parallel between these two verses. Sanjay goes on to say, the term to be noted is Nischala Tattva in verse 9 of Bhaja Govindam. Nischala Tattva means the true state of motionless being. The term, well, that's how I had interpreted in my translation, but it's literally Nischala Tattva means the true state of motionlessness. The term to be noted in verse 9 of Upadēśa Undiyār is sat-bhava. Yes, these two terms, we can take them as meaning more or less the same. Sat-bhava means the state of being. So I believe these two terms have more or less the same meaning or implication. That is, nischala tattva is almost similar to meaning of sat-bhava. Do you agree with this view? Yes. So when we are in, then Sanjay continues, so when we are in sat-bhava or nischala tattva, that itself is parabhakti tattva. And this parabhakti tattva leads us to jiva mukti. Yes, I would agree. He asked me to comment on this. I would agree with that. And parabhakti is the supreme devotion. One of the meanings of sangha in sat-saṅga is attachment to sat or devotion to sat. So it is, sat-saṅga is also, we can take sat-saṅga, we can interpret sat-saṅga as that devotion to what is real. In other words, that attachment to what is real, that love for what is real. So Sanjay, I hope that adequately answers what you wanted to ask about this verse.
Yes, sir. It answers my question. Now, this term nirmoha, it means, you said it means freedom from delusion.
Delusion,
so,
yes.
Freedom from delusion. So this delusion, is it only this self-delusion or other types of delusions like I, mine, these are all...
Moha is a general term for all types of delusion. That is, when we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are, all forms of delusion arise. So the root of all delusion is the delusion about, is our wrong awareness of ourselves. Our awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. In other words, ego is the root of all delusion.
Okay.
So we are free from moha to the extent that we are free from ego.
Okay. So this sangha, nirmoha, they are almost similar terms.
Yes, they are very closely. But in the Bhagavan's Tamil verse, actually, he when he translated it into Tamil, he used he used the word sabu, both for that saba will be removed. Sabu means the attachment, and then he talks about chittatin sabu, where he translates moha, chittatin sabu, that is the inner attachments. The implication is that the nisanga is referring to freedom from the outward attachments, whereas the nirmoha is freedom from the inner attachments.
What's the difference between these two, sir? Outer attachment and inner attachments.
We don't have to analyze these things too much. That is, every word has a range of meanings. We don't have to analyze them too much. That any word can be interpreted in different sense. Just like I said, as I said, the term sat-saṅga can be interpreted in so many ways. The deepest meaning, as Bhagavan said, is atma-saṅga. But people also take just being in good company, avoiding bad company and keeping company with good people, that is sat-saṅga. That's in the most superficial sense. So any term can be interpreted. There are different levels of interpretation. And in different contexts or for people at different levels of maturity, different levels of interpretation are appropriate. So we can bring out the deeper meanings, but we shouldn't limit the meaning of any word.
Got it, sir. Got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So now, Jyoti, I think you'd written the question, but I haven't seen what it was. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'll read it out. Okay. Okay. A saint has said that just as the body is behind the clothes, feelings are behind the thoughts. He also goes to say that if feelings were to be changed in a human being, his entire thinking would be revolutionized. This is contradictory to what I learned from other jnanis, swamis, or teachers who say that a feeling is an effect of a thought. Could you please give me some clarity on this?
Okay. Again, the same words are used in different senses in different contexts. So we have to see what is beyond the. We have to see what is behind the words. We shouldn't just get stuck on the words. Generally, the term feeling in English, a feeling means a very vague idea or very vague, it's not something very clear. It's like, I have a feeling that he's not a very good person. Yeah, I've got a hunch. I'm not sure, but I just sort of feel like that. That's one sense of feeling. But I think the person you referred to, the saint who said just as the body is behind the clothes, feelings are behind thoughts. I think what that person means by feelings are that is, we have many thoughts rising in our mind. A lot of the thoughts that we think during the day, there's not much emotional, there's not much, we're not emotionally invested in our thoughts, in many of our thoughts. Many of the thoughts, they just come and go, they're not too important to us. But there are certain thoughts, sometimes we are emotionally very strongly attached to certain thoughts. Like, supposing you meet someone and you don't particularly like that person, you can either think, okay, I'm going to try to avoid this person, or you can have a strong, intense dislike. I really dislike this person. I can't stand this person. That intensity of feeling behind the thought, I don't like this person, is a fairly innocuous thought. There's so many people in this world who we find are not very pleasant people, so we want to keep a distance. But we don't give a lot of emotional weight to our dislike. But we can give a lot of emotional weight. I strongly dislike this person. I can't stand this person. I would do anything I could to cause harm to this person. If you've got a lot of emotional weight behind it, such thoughts are very dangerous. So thoughts without emotional intensity are relatively harmless. Of course, all thoughts, we want to be free of all thoughts, but in the scale of things, the thoughts which have a strong emotional intensity behind them, those thoughts are more dangerous than the thoughts which are but we don't have a strong attachment to. I mean, I use dislike as just one example, but there's some other things like most people, if we belong to a certain religion, for example, because that's a religion we grew up in, we feel familiar with that, and we have a certain attachment to that religion. That's relatively harmless. But there are some people who have strong attachment to their religion. My religion alone is the true religion. Therefore, all other religions are false religions. Because if other religions say something different to my religion, then my religion is right, the other religions are wrong. They attach a lot of emotional intensity to that. And that leads to so many problems. I mean, wars have been fought about religion. People have been persecuted in the name of religion, which is a complete, it's completely going against what religion should be, which is religion it should be the means for us to return to God, so return to love. But because people's emotional attachment to things, even good thoughts can get distorted and become harmful. So yeah, the emotional intensity behind thoughts is that a thought with strong emotional intensity behind it is a more harmful thought and is more difficult to get rid of than a thought with less emotional intensity behind it. I think that's what that person was saying. Whereas the other people, you say other people say a feeling is an effect of a thought. That's they're using feeling in a different sense. So rather than just taking the words at face value, we need to try to understand in what sense the words are being used in each context. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, Michael, thank you. I have one more question if that's okay. Okay, so I heard a teacher say that ignorance of the self gives rise to thoughts. Is that correct?
Generally, in most Advaitic texts before Bhagavan, it was said that the root problem is avidya or ajnana, that is ignorance of ourself. And from ignorance of ourself, everything else arises, all other problems arise. That is true in a sense. But who is ignorant of ourself? Our real nature is never ignorant of itself. Our real nature is pure awareness. So pure awareness is always aware of itself as it is. So what we actually are is never self-ignorant. What is it that is self-ignorant? It is ego that is self-ignorant. So Bhagavan, rather than putting emphasis on the self-ignorance, Bhagavan puts emphasis on ego. Because actually ego and self-ignorance are one and the same thing. Because the very nature of ego is nothing, as Bhagavan said, ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. So what is in that false awareness, I am this body, what is real is I am. The unreal portion is the adjunct, this body. So ego is a mixture of chit, the pure awareness, I am, and jada, the body, which is non-aware. So the ego is called chit jada granti. As this false awareness, I am this body, ego is ignorant of itself. That is, we couldn't be aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are if we were aware of ourselves as we actually are. So the very nature of ego is self-ignorance. So self-ignorance doesn't exist independent of ego. But among the followers of Shankara, there were various schools of thought. Among the followers of Shankara, people interpreted his teachings in different ways. And there was one school of thought that one of the fundamental disputes among his disciples was, what is the ashraya of ignorance, of avidya? Ashraya means basically it means what's it that is ignorant of itself. One group said it cannot be jiva, because jiva cannot be the ashraya of avidya, because avidya comes first and then jiva comes after. So the ashraya of avidya must be Brahman. But the other group said, no, Brahman cannot be ignorant of itself. So it must only be jiva that is ignorant of itself. So there was this fundamental dispute. Bhagavan has clarified the whole thing by, not explicitly, but implicitly, Bhagavan has clarified it by teaching us that the very nature of ego, jiva means ego, the very nature of jiva or ego is to be ignorant of itself. So there's no self-ignorance independent of ego. And according to Bhagavan, ego is the first thought. Only after this first thought, ego, rises, do all other thoughts rise. So to say thoughts arise out of self-ignorance, well, the self-ignorance is ego, which is the first thought. All other thoughts arise out of that, because ego is the thinker of all other thoughts. What is it that is, in whose view do all other thoughts appear? Only in the view of ourself as ego. That it's only when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, but we're aware of anything other than ourselves. And according to Bhagavan, everything other than ourselves is just a thought. So, yes, in a certain sense, thoughts do arise out of self-ignorance, but self-ignorance is itself the first thought, namely the thought called I, or ego. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, Michael, thank you so much.
Bhagavan's teachings are extremely simple, and what is simple is clear. If I try to explain to you some very complex mathematical theory or something like that, it's very difficult to understand because it's complicated. But what is simple is, even a child can understand what is simple. So Bhagavan has taught Advaita in such a simple way, even if it can be understood. We don't need to have vast learning. That is, there's some people who believe you have to read all the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita, and you have to read all the commentaries on them and the sub-commentaries and the commentaries on the sub-commentaries. They think it's by vast study of Advaita that you will be able to understand it. Bhagavan hasn't encouraged extensive study at all. In fact, he said, what we are seeking to know is ourself. We cannot know ourselves in books. We can know ourselves only within ourselves. So Bhagavan has greatly simplified it. And the essence of Bhagavan's teaching is, he expresses it very beautifully in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. He also expresses it in so many other places, but in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he puts it particularly clearly and simply. Ahande undayin anetum undahum. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Self-ignorance, all other thoughts, all phenomena of the world, everything comes into existence only if ego comes into existence. Ahande indrail indrianatum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything here means everything other than what we actually are, our real nature. Ahande yabamam. Ego itself is everything. Adalal, therefore, yadu idu endru nadale, overall yabam and all. Therefore, know that investigating what this is, that means what this ego is giving up everything. Because if we investigate ego, ego will disappear, and along with ego, everything else will disappear. So Bhagavan has expressed Advaita in such a simple and clear way. So if we don't have to read, I mean, in a certain sense, we're better off not reading all the other teachings, because other teachings are far more complicated than Bhagavan's teaching. Bhagavan has simplified it. Bhagavan has given us the simple essence of Advaita in such a simple and clear manner. So if we stick to Bhagavan's teachings, we'll be free of confusion. But if we start reading this commentary and that commentary, and this person's interpretation and that person's interpretation, and this person's interpretation disagrees with that person's interpretation, we get ourselves into a confusion. Whereas if we stick to the simple teachings of Bhagavan, which he's written in a few short works, in Nāṉ Ār, Upadēśa Undiyār, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Ātma-vichara, ātma-vichara, Aruṇācala Padigam. More or less, if we Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Bandam and a few other verses, if we understand these, all of Bhagavan's original writings, if we study them deeply, and most importantly, if we think about them deeply and put them into practice. The practice, of course, is most important, because it's only from the practice that we get the true, deep inner clarity. All other teachings are unnecessary. Once we clearly understand Bhagavan's teachings, if we are told what is written in the Upanishads or in this commentary or that commentary, it'll be clear to us from what perspective they're coming, at what level the explanations are given. But first and foremost, we should stick to Bhagavan's teachings, study Bhagavan's teachings in depth, put them into practice. Then all other spiritual teachings will become clear. Because different people at different levels of spiritual development, so many different spiritual teachings are necessary. Many explanations at many different levels are necessary to suit people at different levels of spiritual development. But Bhagavan is the essence of the essence of the essence. So if we understand Bhagavan, all other things will become clear. We'll understand, oh, this is why it said like that here. This is why it said like that there. So Bhagavan's teachings don't actually contradict any other spiritual teachings. It gives us such a refined view of the essence of spirituality, but all other teachings and all other will understand where they all have their place, and what level they are given, and why they are given like that. It will all become clear. But first and foremost, we should study and get a deep and clear understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, for which the most important, I mean, of course, we need to study Bhagavan's teachings and to think deeply about them, but in order to understand them deeply and clearly, it's absolutely essential that we put them into practice, because the true clarity comes from within. That is, Bhagavan is ever shining. Bhagavan said the true teaching is the teaching through silence, and Bhagavan is ever shining silently in our heart as I am. So the more we turn our attention towards him, towards I am, the more our mind will be bathed in light, so to speak, and the clarity will dawn in our mind by following Bhagavan's path of self-investigation and self-surrender. The more we follow it, the deeper we go in this path, the more all teachings will become clear. The more Bhagavan's teachings will become clear to us, and if Bhagavan's teachings are clear to us, all other teachings will become clear.
Okay, Michael. Yes, Michael. Ramana is indeed my divine anchor, but it's just that, I get curious and attracted to other teachers, and I want to get deeper and find out what they're all about. But ultimately, I come back to Ramana.
Yes. The thing is, other teachers may be giving teachings at different levels and in their own way. I mean, it all has its place, because there are people who need teachings at different levels. But once we've come to Bhagavan, first and foremost, we should understand Bhagavan's teachings and not allow ourselves to be confused by other things. If we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, all other things will then become clear.
Yes,
that doesn't mean we'll necessarily agree with all other teaching, but we'll understand, oh, this is why they say like that, because this is necessary for people at such and such a level, at such and such a stage of spiritual development. So all spiritual teachings have their place, but not all, but none are as deep or as clear or as simple as Bhagavan's. So
I agree. I'll follow your advice, Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
So let's first understand Bhagavan thoroughly by studying his teachings and putting them into practice.
Yes, Michael.
Okay. I think various people have their hand up, and I see Shiv. I see you're raising your hand physically. Do you want to ask?
Yes, this is more down to certain practical aspect that I am following. And I do believe at this time I need a little bit of guidance here. Now, as Sadhu Om and Bhagavan says, the true way to spiritually progress is Atma-vichara, or total surrender to Guru. and my guru is obviously Ramana.
Yes.
Now, I alternate in practical. I try to do early morning Atma-vichara. It is not right to say early morning. I try to do it at every given opportunity, little bit of it, little bit of it, little bit of it. There are moments when the whole thing is very pleasant, but there are days when I wish, why am I there on that day? It's the part of para 13. He says that ātma-vichara tavara, where, before any other thoughts rises, you have to get rid of it and go back to the self.
Yes.
I find that this is, sometimes I am able to do it, but most of the times it is a struggle.
Yes.
And it is sometimes very, very frustrating.
Yes.
But I don't know why I should feel frustrating, but I should not. If I am really looking at Ramana, there is no scope for me to get frustrated anywhere in life. But in practice, that is not happening. So what I go back to the surrender process. And the surrender process, I visualize when I get up, I feel Bhagavan is there with me. When I try to drink a cup of coffee, I offer it to him first. And then at every stage, it is Ramana, 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 Ramana. This part has definitely, when I look what I was 3 years back and what I am now, I see, yes, there is a lot of changes that has happened. But I am not able to control this unwanted thought, Michael.
Okay, Bhagavan has given answers to all these things. That is what he says in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph. Anma chintane tavira, vera chintane kalambavadku satram idum kodamo. That is, without giving the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than atma chintana.
No, the mind tricked me. I understand intellectually.
Yes.
I have gone through that para several times.
Yes, yes.
But the mind is more powerful sometimes than that I could exercise at that time.
Right, yes, yes. So, but what I'm saying is, there Bhagavan is describing the ideal towards which we are aiming. That is,
yes.
If we give no room to the rising of any thought other than atma-chintana, that means other than self-attentiveness, that is giving ourselves to God. So that is our aim, is to give ourselves wholly to God, to surrender ourselves. So
even the effort is surrendering, is giving to God? Even a sincere effort to reach that state itself?
Yes, that is
an offering?
Yes, because that is, there are different levels of surrender. We can, that is, surrender begins with dualistic devotion. We have devotion for a particular name and form of God, and the more we have devotion for God, the more we want not my will but thy will be done. So we begin by trying to surrender our will to the will of God. In other words, we try to give up our likes, dislikes, and everything. Whatever happens, we accept that as the sweet will of the Lord. As Bhagavan says in Nāṉ Ār, Ninishtam enishtam, your will is my will. So we try to negate our will and let everything happen according to the will of God. That is the beginning, the early stages of devotion, of surrender. But by this, we can give up our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears. We can give them up to a considerable extent.
Yes.
We cannot give them up entirely, because what is the root of all likes and dislikes, desires and attachments? It is ourself as ego. So long as we rise as ego, the very nature of ego, Bhagavan says, Urupatri undam, Urupatri nitkam, Urupatri undumika ongam. So Urupatri means grasping form. So attachment to things other than ourselves is the very nature of ego. So long as we rise as ego, we cannot be totally free of likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on, because these are the very nature of ego. So in order for the surrender to become complete, we not only have to surrender our will, we have to surrender the one who has the will. That is self-surrender. That's why Bhagavan said, ātma-samarpaṇa. Atma in ātma-samarpaṇa means ego. Ourself is ego. So it's not just our likes and dislikes that we have to give up. We have to give up ourselves, because only when we give up ourselves can we be completely free of likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments. So in order to give up ourselves, because the nature of ego is to rise and stand and flourish by attaching to things other than itself, so long as we attend to anything other than ourselves, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. Only when we cling to ātma-chintana, that is thought of ourselves, that is when self-attentiveness, then only tedinal otam pidikam. When thought, it takes flight. So the nature of ego is such, it rises and flourishes by attending to things other than itself. It subsides and disappears by attending to itself. So in order to give up ego, we have to attend to ourselves. So ultimately, self-surrender can become complete only by Atma-vichara. That is what Bhagavan implies in that sentence by saying, Atma-chintane tavira vera chintane kalambavataku satram idam kodamo Atmanishta paranai iripade tane isanaku alipadam. So that is the ideal for which we are aiming. But we are not there yet. Our mind, we still have strong Vishaya vasanas. Our mind keeps on being swept away by vasanas going outwards. Bhagavan has an answer for that also. In the 6th paragraph, he says, Pira enangal erandal abatre puti panavatku etniyamal abe yaruku undayatru endru vicharika vendam. That is, if other thoughts arise, without making effort to complete those thoughts, it's necessary to investigate to whom they are thought, to whom they arise, to whom they appear. Etane enangal erinam enna. What if however many thoughts arise, so what? So Bhagavan doesn't want us to worry about how many thoughts arise. However many thoughts arise, so what? Jagrate ai obvaru enamum kalambum podu adu yaruku undaitru endru vicharital enakendru tondrum.
Correct.
As and when each thought arises, to whom does it arise? If we investigate to whom does it arise, it'll be clear to me. Nāṇ Ār indru vicharital manam tan pirapidatiku tiramibidam. By thus investigating who am I, our mind will turn back to its source. Erunda enamum adangibidam. That is, thoughts arise only when we attend to them. So if we, instead of allowing our attention to go after the thought, we turn it back towards ourself, the mind will return to its source, and the thought which had risen will subside. Ipadi paraka manatiku tampirapidatiku tangi nikkam shakti adikari kindradu. That is, by practicing and practicing in this manner, for the mind, the strength to abide in its source will increase. So it doesn't matter however many thoughts rise. Whenever any thought rises, we should try to turn our attention back towards ourselves. By patiently and persistently persevering in this way, gradually the mind will get the strength to abide in its source. What is that strength? That is the strength of bhakti and vairagya. Because the more we turn our attention back towards ourselves, the more love we will cultivate to be self-attentive, and the more we will free ourselves from attachment to other things. So what he refers to here as tan pirapidatiku tangi nikkam shakti, the power to abide firmly in one's source, is the power of bhakti and vairagya, which is cultivated by practicing this atma-vichara. So it doesn't matter however many times we fail. When a small child is learning to walk, how many times it totters a few steps and falls down?
Yes.
But it gets up and tries again. Have you ever seen a child? Has there ever been a child in this world who has ever given up? Every child faces the same difficulty. We toddle and toddle and toddle. Sooner or later we get the hang of it. but the nature of a small child is such, it cannot keep quiet without trying again and again and again. Likewise, we just have to keep on trying. Doesn't matter whether how many times we fail. So long as we are trying, we are on the right path. Bhagavan said, what is the sign of progress? Only true sign of progress is perseverance. Because if we continue trying, that is the measure of our bhakti. So we should never be disheartened by our failure.
Thank you.
As long as we are trying, we are succeeding. Even if we're failing, that is, they say the road to success is paved with failure. Even in a worldly undertaking,
Yes.
people who are successful in a worldly sense, one sense or another, whether they're great sports people or they're billionaires or they're successful politicians or academics or whatever it may be, they succeed by facing failure, and in spite of a failure, they carry on until they succeed. So when worldly people are like that, as spiritual people, we have to do the same. We have to, doesn't matter how many times we fail, keep on trying. That's all that is required. Bhagavan never asked us to succeed. He asked us to try. If we try, he will take care of everything else. So all he said is, try to attend to yourself. Try to surrender yourself. If we do our bit, he will do everything else. But he said beautifully in the 12th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, Kadavalam Guruvum Unmail Verala. God and Guru are in truth not different. Pulil Patadu, Evaru Tirambado, Avare, Guruvin Aropavail Patavagal, Avaral Rakshika Padavare Andri, Orukalamum Kai Vidapada. That is, just as what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger will not return, I mean, will not escape, so those who have been caught in the look or glance of Guru's grace will never be forsaken, but will surely be saved by him. So he gives us a very great assurance there.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But he adds a very important sentence after that. Eninum Guru Katya Varipadi
Tavaramal.
Tavaradu Nadikavendam. Nevertheless, it's necessary to walk unfailingly in accordance with the path that Guru has shown. So what has he asked us to do? He's asked us to try to attend to ourselves, to try to surrender ourselves. If we do that, that is sufficient. He will take care of everything else. He will certainly save us, but we have to do our little bit.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. That's a very, very encouraging one.
Well, it's all Bhagavan's words. It's not my words.
Oh, no, coming through you is Bhagavan's coming.
Yes,
Whatever you are saying is Bhagavan saying as far as I am concerned.
Bhagavan,
And that's the right guidance. It
Bhagavan,
can't be a better guidance. You really answered my inner question.
Yeah, Bhagavan has given us all we need in works like Nāṉ Ār, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Upadēśa Undiyār, Aruṇācala Padigam. Whatever we need, the guidance is there.
What you inspired me today is it's really touched my heart. Thank you, Michael.
Right. Well,
Or rather, Bhagavan touched my heart through you.
So shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll start with another question that I was asked by email. Daniel asked, I thought you might be interested in the following quote and wondered whether you would like to quote on it, to comment on it. Interestingly, it seems that Nisargadatta knew about Bhagavan, as can be deduced from this picture. I mean, in the email, there was a picture of Nisargadatta with a photograph of Bhagavan on the wall behind him. And the quote is from Nisargadatta. I think it's from his, from the book, I Am That, if I remember correctly. I'll read the whole passage. When I first met my guru, he told me, you are not what you take yourself to be. Find out what you are. Watch the sense I am. Find your real self. I obeyed him because I trusted him. I did as he told me. All my spare time I would spend looking at myself in silence. What a difference it made, and how soon. My teacher told me to hold on to the sense I am tenaciously and not to swerve from it even for a moment. I did my best to follow his advice, and in a comparatively short time, I realized within myself the truth of his teachings. All I did was remember his teachings, his face, his words constantly. This brought an end to the mind. In the stillness of the mind, I saw myself as I am, unbound. I simply followed my teacher's instruction, which was to focus my mind on pure being, I am, and to stay in it. I used to sit for hours together with nothing but I am in my mind, and soon peace and joy and a deep, all-embracing love became my normal state. In it, all disappeared, myself, my guru, the life I lived, the world around me. Only peace remained and unfathomable silence. So that is the passage that I've been asked to comment on. Before I comment on this particular passage, I mean, when I received this email, I was slightly hesitant whether to discuss this publicly or not, because I don't want it to appear that I am being critical of Nisargadatta, because who am I to judge what state he was in? I must admit that I'm not overly impressed from all I've heard about Nisargadatta's teachings. It seems to me, though people assume that his teachings were the same as Bhagavan's, it's in things that have been quoted to me, I see some very, very significant differences between what he taught and what Bhagavan's taught. But that could be partly down to translation, because Nisargadatta didn't speak English. He spoke Marathi. And most of, so all that we know about his teachings, we are depending upon people who have interpreted what he said and have translated it into English. So we can't be sure of how accurate the recordings are. I mean, people say they're very accurate. I don't know. But anyway, whatever I say now is not as a judgment on Nisargadatta. I'm just talking about this particular passage that I've been asked to comment on. I remember being shown this passage in I Am That many years ago, soon after I first came to Bhagavan, because at that time, it was shortly after I Am That had come out, and it was among, well, there were very few foreigners, that is North Americans and Europeans and Australians in Tiruvannamalai at that time. But among them, this book became very popular. So someone showed me this particular passage. And I remember when I first read it, I thought, oh, this is very inspiring. The Guru told him to hold on to I Am, so he held on to I Am, and very quickly he attained. I mean, the implication is that he realized himself simply by holding on to that I Am. I thought that was very inspiring when I first was told it. After some time, when I thought about it more deeply, I began to see there are problems in this passage. That is, the implication is that by following what the Guru said, he realized himself. That is what these words seem to imply. But when we understand Bhagavan's teachings, the sadhana, the practice of self-investigation, it is to be done by ourself as ego. But there will never be a time when we come to the end of our inquiry and say, oh, now I've realized what I am, because that which undertakes the investigation, namely ourself as ego, can never realize its true nature. the result of self-investigation is the dissolution of the ego that embarks on the self-investigation. That is, when we investigate ourselves, and come to see what we actually are, we thereby cease to be ego and we remain as we always actually are. So what remains after the dissolution of ego is only our real nature, which is pure awareness. And as pure awareness, we will never feel, I did this sadhana and I realized myself. Because that which did the sadhana has dissolved. And that which we experience ourselves to be as pure awareness is never aware of any ignorance, is never aware of anything other than itself. So it's always aware of itself. This is why in verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Enne ariye Nāṉ, enne arinde Nāṉ, ennal nahe pudaku idanahum. That means saying, I do not know myself, I have known myself, is ground for ridicule. Because it's in poetry, Bhagavan puts it in a very compact form, but what it implies is saying either I do not know myself or I have known myself is ground for ridicule. Enne, why? Bhagavan asks the question why, and then he gives the answer. Tanne vidyam arka irutan undo. To make oneself an object, are there two selves? That is, okay, I'll read a minute. Then in the last sentence he says, Ondrai aneva anubhuti unmeyal, because being one is the truth, the experience of everyone. That is, we all experience ourselves as one. So there are not two selves, one self to know another self. If about an object, we can say objects are things that we know at one time and don't know at another time. There's no object that we know at all times. So it's the nature of objects. We can say about any object, I know this or I don't know this, or I did know it. Previously I didn't know it, now I do know it. We can say about objects, but ourself is not an object. So we are not the sort of thing that we can know at one time and not know at another time. As Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Tānai iritale, tānai aridalam. Being oneself is knowing oneself. Why is that? Because what we actually are is awareness. And the very nature of awareness is to be always aware of itself. So merely by being ourselves, we are knowing ourselves. So there is never a moment when we do not know ourselves. The problem we face is not that we do not know ourselves, but we know ourselves, but it seems when we rise as ego, but we don't know ourselves as we actually are. Why is that? Because as ego, instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we are aware of ourselves as I am this or I am that. I am this body, I am this mind. So long as we are aware of ourselves as the body or mind that we take to be ourselves is an adjunct. It is not what we actually are, because we exist in all three states, where this body and mind appear only in waking. Well, in each dream, the body is different. The mind seems to be the same in all dreams, but these are things that appear in waking and dream, but not in sleep. We exist in sleep, even in the absence of body and mind. So body and mind cannot be what we actually are. So, but even when we are aware of ourselves as I am this body, we don't cease to be aware of ourselves as I am. The real awareness of ourselves is to be aware of ourselves just as I am. We are nothing other than I am. As Bhagavan often said, Nāṉ Ār, I am I. That is, our only true identity is ourself. We cannot be anything other than ourself. So we are always aware of ourselves. We are always aware of ourselves as I am. But instead of being aware of ourselves just as I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. So as Bhagavan said, self-knowledge is not a new knowledge to be acquired. It is there is never a moment when we do not know ourselves. All we need to do is to remove the false awareness of ourselves as I am this or I am that. In other words, as he said in the previous verse of Upadēśa Undiyār, verse 25 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Tane upadi vitu orvadu, tan isan tane unavadam. That is, knowing oneself without adjuncts is knowing God. God here means what we actually are, our real nature. So when it's not something new, but self-knowledge is not a new knowledge that we are to acquire. All we need to do is to remove the wrong knowledge, I am so-and-so, and what remains is the true knowledge I am. So simply knowing ourselves without adjuncts is knowing ourselves as we actually are. But even when we know ourselves mixed with adjuncts, we're still knowing ourselves. There's never a moment when we are not knowing ourselves. So Bhagavan says in this verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, knowing us, saying I do not know myself or I have known myself is ground for ridicule, because that implies that our self is an object that we can know at some time and not know at other times. That is not the nature of ourself. We are never an object. We can never know ourselves as an object. We know ourselves simply by being ourselves. By being ourselves, we know ourselves as I am. Knowing ourselves as I am is the true self-knowledge. But that true self-knowledge is seemingly obscured, but never entirely concealed by our mistaking ourselves to be something other than what we actually are. That's why Bhagavan says that it's ridiculous to say either I do not know myself or I have known myself, because our self is not that sort of thing that we can either know or not know. So when Nisargadatta says that he followed this, I did my best to follow his advice, and in a comparatively short time, I realized within myself the truth of his teaching. That who is it who realizes the truth? It's not the ego that realizes the truth, but what is to follow the teachings, the Guru's teachings, is ourself as ego. If we follow the teachings to the end, this ego who started to follow them, will disappear, and what will remain is what was always there, namely the pure awareness I am. So then there will be no separate I to say, I have realized myself. That is one problem here. The other problem is when he says this, this implies that the way it's worded, it implies a strong sense of doership. I did the sadhana and I achieved the goal. So long as that doership is there, ego is still alive, because it's only ego that feels I did this, I am doing this. Pure awareness never does anything, and pure awareness is never, as pure awareness, which is what we actually are, we would never say, I did this and I realized myself. We wouldn't say either I investigate myself or I realize myself. Sadhuam wrote a poem of 100 verses on Aruṇācala called Aruṇācala Bemba. In one of the verses, they're Tamil verses, but one of them he translated into English as an English verse. And the meaning of that, his English translation of it is, a naked lie then it would be, if any man were to say that he realized the self diving within through proper enquiry set in, not for knowing, but for death, for good for nothing ego's worth. 'Tis Aruṇācala alone, the self by which the self is known. In other words, the ego that is to do the inquiry is to die. What realizes itself, well, Bhagavan actually ridiculed, Bhagavan joked about the term self-realization. Bhagavan said, how to make real what is already real. The problem is not that we need to realize ourselves, but the problem we face now is that we have realized what is unreal. We have taken ourselves to be something other than what we actually are. So if we unrealize the unreal, that is all that is required. There's no need to realize the real. In other words, if we remove ego, what the real knowledge, the real self-knowledge, which is our real nature, will remain as it always was. So what is to realize the self is only the self, but the self is already realized. So there's nothing, it is, as Bhagavan said, it's self-knowledge, ātma-vichara, is not a new knowledge to be attained. All we need to do is to remove the covering of ajnana, the false awareness, I am this body, and what remains is the true knowledge, I am. That is jnana. Bhagavan also expressed this very beautifully in verse 2 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. What he said in that verse is, Kandava nebanena karutinul nada, Kandava nindrida nindradu kandain. In Tamil, it's possible to express things in a very impersonal way, which is difficult to do in English. In English, the best we can do is sometimes we can avoid a subject by using the passive. But in Tamil, even in the active sense, you can express a sentence without an explicit subject. So the first clause of this sentence is such a sentence. When investigated within the mind, who is the seer? The subject is not said here, but it implies when the seer investigated within the mind, who is the seer? That is Kandavan Endrida Karutidal Nada. When the seer investigated within mind, who is the seer? Kandavan Indrida Nindradu Kandain. I saw what remained when the seer thereby became non-existent. So it's not the seer, the ego, that sets out to do the inquiry, but realizes what remains, because the ego has ceased to exist. So what sees what remains when the seer has died is only what was already there. In other words, the pure awareness. But Bhagavan said, I saw. But then he after saying, I saw what remained when the seer became non-existent, then in the next sentence, he refines this. That is, he points out because Bhagavan is expressing something here, but cannot be expressed in words. So he expresses it in one way, and then he corrects himself, so to speak, in the next sentence. In the next sentence, he says, Kandanan endrida karatu erabille. That means, the mind does not rise to say, I saw. Kandilan endrida karu terumaren. So in what way could the mind rise to say, I did not see? In other words, when we investigate ourselves and see what we actually are, we as the mind or ego cease to exist. And what remains is what we actually are, which is what is always aware of itself. So as such, in that state, there's no mind to rise and say, I saw. So since the mind cannot rise to say, I saw, it also cannot rise to say, I did not see. That is why in verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, to say either I do not know myself or I have known myself, both are ground for ridicule. Then in the next sentence, he says, Vindidu vilakidu viruluru vona, vindile panduni vilakine endral. Who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times you elucidated it without speaking? When he says you elucidated it without speaking, he's referring to Aruṇācala as Dakshinamurti. Dakshinamurti is a form of Shiva teaching through silence. Aruṇācala is Dakshinamurti. So who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times, even you as Dakshinamurti elucidated it without speaking? And then he says, Vindidadu unnile vilakida vendre Vintalam achalama vilakida nindrai. Only to elucidate your state without speaking, you stood as a hill shining from earth to sky. That is, only to elucidate the real, but what is the state he refers to as unnile, your state? That is the state of silent and motionless pure awareness. So how can that be elucidated? Only by silence. So but how to elucidate? How does Aruṇācala elucidate it by silence? By simply remaining as it is. By standing as a hill shining from earth to sky, he is thereby elucidating through silence that state of just being, is the implication. This verse is, well, both verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and this verse 2 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, both are elucidating a Tamil proverb. In fact, the wording of the Tamil proverb is, Bhagavan is using the same words in this verse 2 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, but are used in the Tamil proverb. The Tamil proverb is, Kandava Vindile, Vindava Kandile. Kandava Vindile means those who have seen do not say. Vindava Kandile, those who say have not seen. That means if those who have seen means those whose ego has been annihilated and who thereby remain as pure awareness. As pure awareness, we will never say, I have realized myself. Those who say, I have realized myself, they haven't realized themselves, they haven't seen. The word he uses here, the word used in this, that is kandu, means seeing. That Bhagavan uses that various forms of the verb kan to see in this verse. He also uses this verb vindu. Vindu is the adverbial participle of the verb vil, which means in this context it means to speak, but the actual meaning of vil is to open out, expand, unfold, or blossom. It also means to become clear, or to say or to tell. So it's this Tamil proverb, Kandava Vindile, we can interpret it as those who have seen do not say, but the word for say is they do not open their mouth. There's a lot of illusion in the saying, but it's a very, very, I mean, this is a saying that Bhagavan often referred to when talking about when people ask whether so-and-so is a jnani or not, Bhagavan often used to say, Kandava Vindile, Vindava Kandile. Those who have seen will not say, those who say have not seen. It's a very, it's a very simple principle, but a very deep principle. So if we read this passage that has been recorded of what Nisargadatta said, in effect, he's saying, I did the sadhana and I saw. I did what my guru told me, I obeyed him, and I realized myself. That is, when we compare that with what Bhagavan has taught us, it somehow doesn't match up. It doesn't match up because who is to say I have seen? And who, after ego is being annihilated, there's no one left to say, I did such and such sadhana and thereby I achieved. In Murugan, for example, in so many of his verses, he says, I did nothing, Bhagavan just swallowed me. That is because he's a poet, he expresses it in poetic language, but obviously we have to do, so long as we experience ourselves as ego, we need to do what Guru tells us. We need to turn our attention within and we need to cling firmly to the sense of I am. I mean, some portions of this that Nisargadatta says are perfectly true. When I met my Guru, he told, what he says his Guru said, you are not what you take yourself to be. Find out what you are. Watch the sense I am. Find your real self. That's what we need to do. But when we do it, we will lose ourselves. And what will remain is pure awareness. And as pure awareness, we will not feel I did such and such a sadhana and thereby I realized myself. But as pure awareness, it'll be clear to us that we were always clearly aware of ourselves and that we had never risen as ego and therefore never did any sadhana. So long as there's that sense, I did sadhana, ego is still alive. So long as there's the idea, I have realized myself, we haven't realized ourselves, because when we realize ourselves, that is when ego dissolves in pure awareness, what remains is pure awareness, which is ever clearly aware of itself. So when we compare this passage of from this book, I Am That by Nisargadatta, with the deeper teachings of Bhagavan as expressed in verses such as verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and verse 2 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, it doesn't quite match up. There's something, I mean, I'm not passing judgment on Nisargadatta. He may have said this simply to encourage people in their sadhana. I don't know. But Bhagavan says it in a far more refined way in Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam. In the first verse of in the first sentence of verse 2 of Aruṇācala Aṣṭakam, he seems to say, but he said, when the seer investigates within the mind to see who is the seer, I saw what remained when the seer became non-existent. So who is it? Who is that I who saw what remained? It cannot be the seer who did the investigation, because the seer has disappeared. The seer has become non-existent. So the I that sees what remains when the seer has disappeared, that I is what remains, which is pure awareness, which is ever seeing what. That's why Bhagavan goes on to say, but the mind doesn't rise to say I saw. How then can it rise to say I did not see? Who has the power to elucidate this by speaking, when in ancient times, even you as Dakshinamurti elucidated it without speaking? That is, this is something that cannot be expressed. That is why those who have seen do not say. Those who say have not seen. That is, the guru comes to tell us, turn within. But the guru, so guru shows the way, but guru doesn't say, I have seen, I did sadhana, I have seen. That is that type of, only the mind can say that. When we see, we remain as we actually are, and there'll be no mind rising to say, I have seen or I have not seen, is the implication of this. Daniel, is that an adequate answer to that? Is that an adequate comment on that passage, or would you like to ask anything more about it?
Well, Michael, I think that was a more than adequate answer, a very full answer. So thank you very much for that. But as you yourself rightly said, we have to be careful of these translations.
Yes.
It's obviously someone's translation,
Yeah.
been translated from the Marathi into English. So it's at least one step removed from, at least one step removed from what he actually said.
Yes.
Yeah, who knows what the motives may have been behind that.
Yeah.
And it also depends, I think, on who he was speaking to.
Yes, yes. I mean,
you see, it may have been an answer from a disciple,
yes.
which a question which was asked at a particular level,
Yes.
and so the answer would
True.
come back to that particular level.
True, true.
But anyway, thank you for that answer. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true and very subtle to grasp, actually.
Yes. That is why, I mean, as I say, what I said now is not a judgment on Nisargadatta, because it has to be taught. Different levels of explanation have to be given, because not everyone is ready to grasp the deeper and subtler truths.
No, exactly.
So in Advaita, there are so many different levels of explanation are given. And Advaita generally is the deepest type of spirituality. Beyond Advaita, there are so many other, even more superficial explanations are given, but they're all appropriate for different people at different levels of spiritual development. That's why Bhagavan's teachings, though it goes far deeper than most of his teachings, Bhagavan isn't contradicting any other teachings. He's just giving us a refinement. And from a refined view that we learn from Bhagavan, we can see other things. We can see the shortcomings in them, but we can also see how they may be appropriate for others in certain stages of spiritual development.
Yeah. Yes, quite. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
Right. Then I think the first person to have their hand up is Raja. Do you want to ask a question?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Michael, my question is about verse 26 of Upadēśa Undiyār, which you have already mentioned in your previous answer. But I'd like to ask about the practical implication of this verse. Basically, I mean, does this verse mean that ego is to try to be the self? Couldn't it also be said knowing ourself alone is being ourself, because vichara is ego trying to know itself,
yes,
and thereby to see its non-existence? So it seems easier to me to think that knowing ourselves, because we can make effort to try to know ourselves, and the byproduct is that we be ourselves.
That is what Bhagavan says in verse 26. That is, he says that is a clarification of what he said in verse 25. In verse 25, he said, knowing oneself without adjuncts is itself knowing God, because God shines as oneself. So he clarifies what it means to be knowing oneself without adjuncts. If we know ourselves without adjuncts, we are not an object that is known by ourselves. We know ourselves simply by being ourselves, because our nature is awareness. The practical implication, so Bhagavan is here describing the state of attainment, but it has a very deep practical implication, because as he said in verse 33 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, there are not two selves, for one self to be an object known by the other. So we can never know ourselves as an object. Knowing ourselves, to know any object is an action. It's an act of knowing. I know this. There's what is called the triputi, the three factors. You've got, if you say I know this, there's the I, the knower, the ego, the subject, know, the act of knowing, this, the object. So you've got three things there. Self-knowledge is not like that. We can never be an object known by ourselves. What we actually are is pure awareness. So we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. To know anything other than ourselves, you've got the triputi, these three things, the knower, the knowing, and the known. But in the state of self-knowledge, the knower, the knowing, and the known are not three separate things, they're one and the same. That is, the I that knows, the I that is known, and the awareness that I has of itself are all one and the same thing. It's a state of non-duality, it's a state of perfect oneness. So it is only by being ourselves that we know ourselves. And this also this also follows on from what he said in verse 23. In verse 23, he says, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu unavu verin meyin, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Undipara, unavei namai ullam undipara. That means Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu unavu verin meyin. Because of the non-existence of other awareness to be aware of what exists. That implies, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to know what exists, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What exists is awareness. Uḷḷadu is unavu. That is, what exists is awareness. So what exists, Uḷḷadu is that which is aware of its own existence. There's no other awareness, there's no awareness other than it to know it. If there were, if what exists were not aware, it wouldn't know its own existence. And whatever doesn't know its own existence doesn't actually exist, according to Bhagavan, because sat and chit are one and the same. Being and awareness, Uḷḷadu and Uṇāvu, are one and the same thing. If awareness was something other than what exists, it wouldn't exist, and therefore it couldn't know what exists. So the logical conclusion we have to come to is that what exists is awareness. And in this first sentence, Bhagavan he uses the word Uḷḷadu. Uḷḷadu literally means what exists or that which exists. That implies that's a third person. It's a third person participial noun. But though for the purpose of expression, it's said in the third person, Bhagavan clarifies in the final sentence, but it's actually the first person, because he then says, Unave namai ullam. That means awareness alone exists as we. But very interestingly, the verb he uses here for exists, ullam, is a second, though the subject is awareness, the verb is a second person plural form of the verb. So he's, by using that second person plural form, he's emphasizing that awareness is nothing other than we. That is, he says awareness is we, but though the subject is awareness and we is there the subject complement, the verb is a second person plural verb, first person plural form of the verb. So he's taking, it's a bit difficult to explain, though the subject is Uṇāvu, usually with a verb like awareness, I mean a noun like awareness, you'll usually use a third person singular verb to go with it, but he uses a second person plural. He uses plural here, not in the sense of plural, but in the, as a collective form of the, as a inclusive form of the first person singular. That is, he often talks about we, not that there are many eyes, but so as not to exclude those of us he is addressing. So he says, he uses Nāṉ, which is an inclusive first person plural pronoun, because in Tamil there are two words for we. There's Nāṃ, which includes the person who's being spoken to, and Nāngal, which excludes the person being spoken to. So he used this word Nāṃ to include us. So though he's actually talking about one thing, the one eye, he uses this term Nāṃ in many, many verses. So in this last sentence, he's very, very much emphasizing that awareness is nothing other than ourselves. So we are what exists, and we are what is aware of what exists. And so it's a state of complete oneness. So because awareness is our very being, we can know ourselves only by being ourselves. You asked about what practical implication this has. It is very important to understand this, because when we are attending to ourselves, we are not attending to an object. We are, by attending to ourselves, we are being as we actually are, because what we actually are is pure awareness, which is always aware of nothing other than itself. So how to be aware of nothing other than ourselves? Only by attending to ourselves. So self-attentiveness is the means to be as we actually are. So being ourselves and knowing ourselves, they're one and the same. So whether you say being ourselves is knowing ourselves, or knowing ourselves is being ourselves, it works both ways around. Both are equally true. Being is knowing, knowing is being.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, Michael. So basically, in this verse, Bhagavan is talking about not the ego, but the self. Like our self doesn't represent.
Yes, when he in verse 26, he's talking about he says, because he's clarifying what he said in verse 25, which is knowing ourselves without adjuncts. When we know ourselves without adjuncts, there's no ego. When we know ourselves with adjuncts, that is ego. When we know ourselves without adjuncts, that is our real nature.
Okay.
So though our real nature is, that is, Bhagavan often said, the path cannot be different in nature than the goal. But if the path were of a different nature to the nature of the goal, it wouldn't lead to the goal. So since the nature of our goal is to know and to be what we actually are, the path is to know and to be what we actually are. That is, it's only by attending to ourselves that we can be as we actually are. So even when Bhagavan's talking about the goal, there's practical implications there.
Michael, I just want to ask you, did you want to go on for some more time?
I'm happy to go on as long as people have questions.
Okay. Till about 5 or?
Yeah, well, yes, as long as people are ready to continue listening to me. So I mean, I'm ready to stop whenever, but since people still have hands raised, I think we should continue. And I've only covered 3 of the email questions. There's another 4 or 5 of them. So we won't get through all of them, but let's continue as long as people like. Sujan Kumar, you've got your hand raised.
Michael J, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Michael J. Can you talk a little about Bhagavan's outward life? That is, the message of Bhagavan's outward life in Aruṇācala for 54 years? This is my question.
The whole purpose of Bhagavan's outward life is to turn us within. That is, why is it that our own real nature appears externally in the form of Guru? Only to turn us within. As far as Bhagavan's outward life is concerned, there are so many stories in books, we can read the stories and we can draw our own inferences. The problem with a lot of stories is everyone who writes stories about Bhagavan's teachings, they are writing about their view of Bhagavan. But anyone, so long as we see Bhagavan as a person, as something other than ourselves, we are not seeing Bhagavan as he actually is. So Bhagavan sometimes said, the jnani is like a mirror. Whoever comes in front of a mirror sees a reflection of themselves. So people see in the jnani a reflection of themselves. So many people who have recorded stories about Bhagavan have done so without having a deep understanding of what Bhagavan has, of the meaning, of the significance of what Bhagavan has done or said. So, I mean, there are many interesting stories in Bhagavan's life, but we need, any stories we need to read with a pinch of salt, because often there are many inaccuracies in the recording. And in fact, some of the things that were written in biographies during Bhagavan's lifetime, the first main biography was about Bhagavan was Self-Realization, which was written in English by Sudananda Bharati. No, not by Sudananda, by B.V. Narasimha. And a year or two after that, so soon after that, a Tamil biography was written called Ramana Vijayam by Sudananda Bharati, in which he mostly followed self-realization, but also took in other things. There are many, and various other biographies came out as the years went on. I think self-realization probably came out about 1930, 31. So in the 1930s, several biographies in different languages came out. Only towards the end of Bhagavan's life, that in the last few years of Bhagavan's life, did he start pointing out here and there inaccuracies in these biographies. People would ask him, Bhagavan, he said here, such and such. Bhagavan said, no, but it wasn't actually like that. He kept quiet all those years, but finally he pointed out the inaccuracies. For example, Bhava Swami wrote about Bhagavan's so-called second death experience when he had been with Parani Swami. They'd gone to Pachaman Coil, and they'd had an oil bath there, and returning in the hot sun, Bhagavan sat on a rock and his body became lifeless. And Parani Swami embraced him and was weeping. And then after about 20 minutes, his body suddenly came back to life. Because this was the only such incident that was witnessed by anyone, Parani Swami told people, and this came to be known by Bhava Swami, so he wrote this in the biography, and he referred to it as Bhagavan's second death experience. Only after many years, Bhagavan said that wasn't actually the second death experience, that was the last one. Between the first one that happened in Madurai, when with that intense fear of death, he went within and his body became lifeless for about 20 minutes or so, and suddenly it came back to life. Between that time and this incident with Parani Swami, Bhagavan said it happened on several occasions, but it happened that nobody witnessed it. And on each occasion, it was much the same, but for about 20 minutes or so, his body actually became lifeless. And then suddenly the life came back again. Bhagavan never offered any explanation for this, why it happened, but it happened. So there are many details in the biographies that are not accurate. Some of them Bhagavan later corrected, some of them maybe he never corrected. We don't know. So as I say, we have to take stories about Bhagavan's life with a pinch of salt. Some of them, there are some very instructive incidents. But because we can never be sure about these stories, we can't be sure to what extent any story is accurate. And because the purpose, as Sadhu Om often used to say, Sadhu Om has written various biographies of Bhagavan. He's written in prose, and he's also written several biographies of Bhagavan in verse. But though he's written several biographies of Bhagavan, he often used to say, Bhagavan didn't come to this world to be the subject of a story. He came to this world to give us teachings, to tell us to turn back within. So that is the main teaching we have to take from Bhagavan. The whole purpose of Bhagavan's life is to turn us back within. And this is very nicely illustrated by one story that I often tell, because it illustrates Bhagavan's stories, Bhagavan's teaching so well. That is, there was a devotee of Bhagavan called Janaki Mata. She lived in Tanjore, and she had her own following. She was considered as a great bhakta, and she had her own following. She often used to come to Bhagavan, and she had great love for Bhagavan. Once when she was visiting the ashram, she saw Bhagavan returning from the cow shed, because Bhagavan often used to go to the cow shed to see Lakshmi and the other cows. So when Bhagavan was returning, there were only one or two people with him, not many people about. So she thought this is a very good opportunity. So she went up to him, she prostrated and put her head on his feet. And I think she held his feet and put her head on them. So Bhagavan looked down at her with a smile and asked, what are you doing? She said, I'm holding the feet of my guru. Bhagavan said, are these the feet of your guru? This body is perishable and these feet are perishable. If you take this body, if you take these feet to be the feet of Guru, you will be disappointed, because one day this body is going to perish like every other body. The real feet of Guru are what are shining in you as eye. Hold on to those feet. Only those feet will save you. So that is though Bhagavan appeared outwardly in human form, the whole purpose of that human form is to turn us back within. So Bhagavan never says, come to me, I will give you liberation. He says, go within and see that you are already liberated. There's nothing I can give you because you've already got everything you need. All you need to do is to turn within and see what you actually are, and you will find that you were never lacking in anything. So there are nice stories like this that illustrate but emphasize very strongly the purpose of Bhagavan's incarnation, the purpose of Bhagavan's manifestation in human form.
And just a little, Michael G.
Yes.
Okay, in the last pages of your book, Happiness and the Art of Being, you have talked about Bhagavan's equality, samatvam, equal vision, and ahimsa, and those outward qualities.
Yes.
Okay, and my question is, which are those qualities you like the most in Bhagavan's outward behavior? Because that is the best we can follow, at least until we can get matured, something like that. Actually, that part is the most beloved part of that book, actually, for me.
When we are attracted to Bhagavan, we love everything about Bhagavan. So, I mean, how to say what we love? I mean, his love, his compassion, his, I mean, that, I think in that book, I mentioned that story of how compassionate he was to the hornets when he disturbed their nest accidentally. He allowed them to sting his thigh to their heart's content, and they stung only the thigh, not any other part of his body. But it was the thigh that had though unintentionally, it had disturbed their net, so he thought, let it take its due punishment. So that is so much compassion he had for those hornets. Like that, he had so much love, because Bhagavan, that is the beauty of Bhagavan's outward life. As best as is possible, his outward life illustrated what he actually is. Because what he actually is the infinite ocean of love. That is, for him, his love has no limits, because for him, in his view, he alone exists. So there are no others. So when he sees us, he doesn't see us as other than himself. He sees us as himself. So he loves us as himself. So there is not a creature in this world, but he's not loved by Bhagavan as himself. Whether we are good or we're bad, Bhagavan's love is equal for all. So there's so many stories in his life that illustrate that equal love that he has for all, both the good and the bad. He's not partial to people who are good. He's equal to all. Because for him,
Thank you, Michael G. Thank you.
He's only himself.
Michael, if I can add with your permission.
Yes.
You remember the robbers who attacked and beat up Bhagavan?
Yes.
And when the police officer, the superintendent of police from Vellore, who was commander, who came and asked Bhagavan to identify, he totally refused to identify.
No,
and when he did not identify, others around him who knew the thieves and the robbers also did not identify.
But do you know what he said? When they asked him to identify the thief, he said, identify the one whom I beat in a previous life. He is the one who beat me now.
Oh, that is too much. That is real love. It is a real, we call ocean of compassion, and that's what it is.
Infinite ocean of compassion without any limit whatsoever.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt what you were talking, but it was on top of my head when you were talking about it.
It is a very illustrative story. When some of the sadhus who were with Bhagavan, when they wanted to retaliate, but particularly when they saw Bhagavan being beaten with a stick, they wanted to retaliate. Bhagavan said, about the thieves, they are doing their dharma. Let them do their dharma. We should stick to our dharma. Their dharma is to beat and to steal. Our dharma is to quiet.
Equanimity. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so many nice stories from Bhagavan's life that illustrate his limitless love and compassion. So, John, was there anything else you wanted to ask?
Michael, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, there was a little bit a network problem.
Okay.
No, there are no follow-up questions. Why I asked this question is, I'm reading two books, Kannada books related to some issues like agricultural philosophy, two books just last week. In both those books, two books, okay, which are not at all related to Bhagavan, there are ideas regarding Bhagavan's teachings.
Yes.
I was pleasantly surprised because one book regarding agricultural philosophy talk about Bhagavan.
Sorry, we've lost you.
Concept. Another one, educationalist, how Bhagavan, that's why I asked those questions. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, right. And Sanjay, you have your hand raised?
Yes, sir. I am going through these Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham verses with my friend, and we came across this verses 18 and 19, which talks about the heart, 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. Heart. Clear. So I was wondering if this has got no significance in our spiritual pursuit. Why has Bhagavan given it so much importance to include it in the Anubandham? Because it has got no significance according to me.
Bhagavan, it has no significance. Bhagavan didn't give importance to it, but there were people around Bhagavan who had practiced yoga marga. So when Bhagavan talks about heart, they asked Bhagavan, is this heart you talk about, is it the same as Anahata chakra? So Bhagavan said, no, it's not Anahata chakra. The heart is what we actually are. Heart is another name for the reality. They said, but where in the body is it located? If it's not the Anahata chakra, where is it located? Because people ask like that, Bhagavan said, in relation to the body, the heart is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest. That is the point in the body where the awareness eye is centered. And he illustrated it by saying, if you ask who will go and who will run and fetch the mail, a schoolboy will say, I will. He'll point at his chest. He won't point at his legs and say, I will run. He points at his chest. If you ask, who knows the answer to this sum? The schoolboy will say, I know, points at his chest. That is, we all instinctively point at our chest when referring to ourselves. And where we point is actually a little to the right from the center of the chest. We can also observe this in so many other ways. If you get a shock, supposing you're walking down the street and suddenly a car behind you honks its horn, you get a shock. If you observe, you will find a sensation here, 2 digits to the right. That is, this is any shock. Well, you can, if you observe, you can find that it seems to be radiating from this point on the center of the chest. We, even in ordinary language, we talk, if someone is extremely sad, we talk about them being heartbroken. And actually, when one suffers a bereavement or something, when one loses someone who is very dear to one can actually feel almost like an aching in the chest. So generally our feelings, our emotions, we feel centered in our chest. So that's the innermost, that in relation to the body, that is the innermost point. But this is only in relation to the body. The body is not I. That is the central teaching of Bhagavan, is body is not I. So he pointed this out to those who were not ready to think beyond the body. But the same people said, oh, if that is the case, then why isn't it written in any book that the heart is 2 digits to the right from the center of the chest? Bhagavan said, I don't know why it's not written. Then he happened to come across in a Malayali translation of Ashtanga Hridayam, which is a standard Sanskrit text on Ayurveda. He came across these 2 verses. He translated them from the Malayalam version was obviously a translation from Sanskrit. So Bhagavan didn't have the Sanskrit verses, but from the Malayalam, he translated it into Tamil for the sake of those who were looking for some sort of scriptural authority. He also pointed out in the Bible, in one of the Psalms, it is said, the wise man's heart is on the left. Sorry, the fool's heart is on his left, the wise man's heart is on his right. So Bhagavan did point these things out, but it's not a big deal. If you observe, as I say, if you get a shock or if you feel anything very intensely, you feel it on the right side of the chest. But the body is an object. It's not ourself. It's something other than ourselves. So we shouldn't attach any importance to it. That's why in the next two verses, though Bhagavan included those two verses in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Bandham, he followed them up with two verses that he had translated from Yoga Vashishta, in which he said, I can't remember the exact verses, but he says, awareness is not, the heart is not inside or outside. It is awareness. The mirror in which all this whole world appears, that is the heart. The screen on which all this appears is the heart.
No, what I was wondering was, by including these two verses, it has given rise to more confusion than like Arthur Osborne and others. Now they feel that this is the heart to be concentrated upon. So that way I was feeling as it would have been better if Bhagavan had avoided including this. That was my idea. That is your view. That is not Bhagavan's view. Bhagavan allowed them to be included there. Bhagavan knows. But those who are ready to understand, those who are mature enough to understand his teachings correctly will understand them correctly. Those who are not mature enough will not understand them correctly. So if people latch onto those two verses, where there's so many other verses where Bhagavan says in Aruṇācala Pancharatnam, he's addressing Aruṇācala, he says, because you always dance in the heart as I, they call you heart. Heart is your name. So people take whatever is suitable to their level of understanding. So for some people, it may seem very significant that Bhagavan taught that the heart is 2 digits right from the center of the chest. That may be appropriate for them, but it's not only they take it, sir, they try to teach it to others also. So that's also another problem. Yes, but let them teach it to anyone. Only those who are not ready to understand more deeply will latch on to those who give the more superficial explanation. So in Bhagavan's Arulakshi, Bhagavan's rule, Bhagavan's kingdom of grace, in his rule of grace, nothing happens that shouldn't happen. Everything, whatever happens is happening for a purpose. We may not understand the purpose. That doesn't matter. So everything has a purpose, has a place. Beautiful, sir. Beautiful, sir. Thank you very much. Beautifully said, sir. Yes. So Bhagavan is very enigmatic. We can't, with our little mind, we can't limit Bhagavan and tie him down. If we want to know Bhagavan as he is, if we want to understand the truth of Bhagavan, we need to know the truth of ourselves. That is his central teaching. Know yourself and you will know Bhagavan. And we have to accept yourself, you cannot know Bhagavan. And we have to accept everything that he has done it for a purpose. We shouldn't doubt his this thing. We shouldn't doubt his intelligence. Yes. Everything is for a purpose. This coronavirus pandemic is for a purpose. All the wars are for a purpose. All the famines are for a purpose. Everything that happens in this world, we can't understand why it is so, but it is all happening for a purpose. Why did the thieves beat Bhagavan? It's all for a purpose. Because he beat them, according to him, because he had beaten someone in a previous life, he got the beating in this life. So he is so enigmatic, we cannot... Master of proper placement, sir. Yes. Master of proper placement, it said. Master of proper placement. He'll place everything in the right place, right time. Exactly. Nothing is out of place in his rule of grace. So no one had their hand raised. I've still got a lot of questions I'd received by email. Shall I answer them, or what does anyone feel?
Perhaps next time.
I'm sorry to everyone whose questions I couldn't answer, but next time.
Yes, I think we have to limit. It's quite exhausting, I think.
If we are the doer, it is exhausting. But if Bhagavan is the doer, there's no exhaustion.
Yes.
Things happen as they're meant to happen.
Yes.
Things happen when and where and how they're meant to happen.
It's amazing how they have happened and how what a wonderful thing this has become.
Yeah. Well, it all happens. Nothing happened. Avanarulandri or anuvamasayadu. Without his grace, not even an atom moves. So all is happening according to his will.
Yes.
Our only task is to be very vigilant to avoid this ego rising. As long as ego doesn't rise, then let everything happen as it's meant to happen.
Mano Nasha, I believe, is something you totally eradicate the ego.
Yes.
But that's the very, very difficult. I am trying, Michael. It's not easy, I can tell you that.
That's all you have to do is to try. Leave the rest of the outcome you leave to Bhagavan.
Well, maybe on that note, I'll take leave of you all. We can keep trying to eradicate our egos.
Right.
We talk about our ego as if it's a possession of ours. But we are the ego. Only when we are eradicated, then what remains is what is real.